Hello, I'm Regina Lay, the senior news editor of Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News, balitang thinking, hindi breaking. In this episode,
We should have a lot of public hearings para mapag-usapan yan. Because yan yung 250 billion, pera yan ng mga empleyado ng government tsaka ng private. Kukunin kasi yan sa GSIS, SSS. Yan yung contribution natin, di ba?
we're going to have a very frank discussion about that new bill to set up the first ever sovereign wealth fund in the Philippines. First, let's define things. A sovereign wealth fund is a government-managed fund that invests in financial instruments like stocks, bonds, commodities, real estate, and even cryptocurrency. This can be locally or internationally. The goal is very simple: grow the money for future use. Because, as we all know, just keeping it in the bank doesn't cut it anymore. Luging-lugi ka pa because inflation is so high. So in principle, it's a good thing, right? But this House Bill 6398 that will create the country's first sovereign wealth fund, to be called Maharlika Investment Fund, has raised a lot of big questions. First, there's the timing issue. Here's Calixto Toti Chiquiamco, a respected economist and president of the Foundation for Economic Freedom.
It's not the right time now for two reasons. One is the right time is when you have a lot of fiscal surplus. But as you know, because of the pandemic, our government now is in a very tight fiscal position. Our debt to GDP is about 60%. You usually set up a sovereign wealth fund when you have excess cash, when you have some kind of bonanza from excess earnings from either commodity exports or from strikes, etc. But we don't have, so now is not the right time. Secondly, there is a danger of corruption, of politicization of the investments, etc. Of course, they say there will be good governance, there will be independent directors, but you can only do that when you have a rule of law. We don't really have a rule of law. Even those persons who have been convicted are living a high life in believing. So what kind of rule of law do we have? I think the right time to set up a sovereign wealth fund is when we have a rule of law.
Toti's right. As of September this year, the country's debt has swelled to 13.5 trillion pesos. That's a record high. Secondly, the fact that the bill is co-authored by House Speaker Martin Romualdez and Representative Sandro Marcos is also raising a lot of eyebrows. We all know the ties that bind. That's President Marcos's cousin and son. Perhaps because of that, lawmakers moved with uncharacteristic lightning speed on the matter. Just within a day of the bill being filed, the House Committee on Banks had approved it in principle. Even more alarming is that they're proposing Marcos himself chair the corporation that will manage the fund. Here's Congressman Paul Daza, the House Senior Deputy Minority Leader.
First 15 members sa board, dalawa lang ang independent directors. Nakalagay doon, appointed by the President pa. So umangal ako doon sa Committee on Banks na ako ideally siguro at least 5. Tapos chairman ang president. Sa ibang bansa, ganun yun Siyempre, head of state. Pero I think for us, sa political setting natin, and for a better check and balance, mas maganda ibang ilagay, hindi na ang president.
One of the bill's proponents, albay Representative Joey Salceda, himself an economist, insisted that putting the president in charge of the fund would prevent a scenario like the 1MDB scandal. He told ANC, and I quote, "Hinding-hindi mangyayari yun dito. It won't happen here. 1MDB is, of course, Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund that is now world famous because it lost billions of dollars due to corruption and bribery. But Salceda is wrong. Malaysia's ex-Prime Minister Najib Razak did oversee their sovereign wealth fund and even chaired the advisory board. He was later found to have received more than $1 billion illegally through the fund, which he and his wife used to live a high life. Najib is now in jail serving a 12-year sentence." The third big issue is that everyone from the IMF to the World Bank is warning of a global recession next year. Recessions bring extreme volatility in markets, which brings us back to the question, is it the right time to be starting a sovereign fund? Wick Veloso, the president and general manager of GSIS, disagrees with those who say that the timing is off. He was interviewed on One News's The Big Story.
I beg to disagree. In the first place, ang trabaho po namin dito sa mga pension funds po na nabanggit nyo, GSIS at ang SSS ay mag-invest ng pondo. We have 1.5 trillion funds under management po. And we collect 26 billion pesos a month. Our duty is to be able to find viable investments and be able to make it productive, safe for the future generation, specifically for our members. Ngayon po, kami ay nag-i-invest at ang program po na pag-invest sa isang sovereign wealth fund, ang ngayon magsasama-sama po ang SSS, GSIS, and the two government banks, Land Bank and DBP, so we can train our guns to be able to not only make our money grow, but also help in nation building.
Wick also disputes the idea that sovereign funds should only be set up when a country has surplus money.
That's a very much ill-perceived. Hindi lang ho sa mga excess, hindi lang ho sa pagka nagkaroon ka ng pasobra, magkakaroon ka ng sovereign wealth fund. That's a very much Google definition that has been, tignan po ninyo ang Indonesia, meron ho silang sovereign wealth fund. Ang purpose po nito ay para sa national development, which is similar to what Vietnam is also doing. I would like to change everyone's perception about how a sovereign wealth fund is.
Teka. Bago matapos yung episode, may request kami sa inyo. Hi, I'm Mark from the Puma Podcast audio team. If you've enjoyed listening to Puma Podcast, maybe you've thought, how can I support them? Now, all you have to do is go to pumapodcast.com. You'll find a link there to our Pumapatak jar. Give whatever you can. Salamat and Merry Christmas.
The Maharlika Fund's initial seed money will be taken from at least 5 government institutions. That's the GSIS, SSS, Land Bank, the Development Bank of the Philippines, and the Treasury. That's at least 275 billion pesos from them, and that's just in the first year. Recall that under President Duterte, SSS already had to raise its premiums just to extend its fund life. But perhaps the biggest shock of all in the past week of big headlines was who emerged as the voice of reason amongst all this.
Pagkatapos, alam natin na lumulobo ang utang ng Pilipinas. Samantalang malaki pa rin ang utang natin sa mga health workers, hindi pa bayad, senior citizens, kulang-kulang pa rin ang stipend. Ang laki-laki ng utang natin panlabas. Pagkatapos, magbibigay pa tayo ng tinatawag na sovereign fund. Sa tingin ko, nakakatakot yata ipusta yung retirement fund, yung pension fund ng GSIS. Nakakatakot yata. Wag naman i-invest.
That's right. That was Senator Amy Marcos, the president's sister. Was she just politicking? We'll never know. But the points she raised are valid. Would you invest your retirement money in high-risk assets? Because of House Bill 6398's powerful backers, it is expected to be passed before the end of the year. If you don't agree with this, what can you do as a taxpayer? Here's Representative Paul Daza with the last word.
All employees in a private sector, nagko-contribute tayong lahat, di ba? All employees sa government. Ako, binabawasan ako for GSIS. Pwede umangal lahat. Now, ang maganda ngayon, with online, with social media, you can get support, di ba? Online, it's so easy. And then let the voices be heard. Let the questions be asked, and the right questions. Actually, all questions are good questions. So, nasa taong bayan yan, di ba? Questioning natin.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka. Again, I'm Regina Lay, the senior news editor of Puma Podcast. This episode was edited by Carl Sayat and produced by Kat Ventura. If you like this episode, share it with a friend or two. And of course, don't forget to follow Teka Teka and Puma Podcast wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.